How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of LandO's Logic. Today, we are touching on the most recent roster announcement. The newest franchise to announce their roster moving into Modern Warfare 2 is the Florida Mutineers. You can make it 8 out of 12. We're almost there. Almost all 12 teams have been announced, but today, the Florida Mutineers have announced their lineup. And today, what I really wanted to do was not to just talk about the Florida Mutineers, but talk about why I feel like they are going to be the most underrated team in the CDL moving into next season. And I know we don't have every team that has been announced, but just based off the trajectories, based off of the rumored lineups, which seem to be pretty on point up to this stage, why I feel like they're going to be underrated and why I feel like they're going to be better than a lot of people think. Because, I mean, really getting into it, this is going to be one of the more under the radar type of roster announcements, right? It's not an Optic Texas. It's not an Atlanta FaZe or an LA Thieves. It's not one of those franchises. And you're not also going to have that heavy hitter, you know, veteran type of player who has the social media fun. You don't really have that either when it comes down to this four-man lineup. And that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Now, the reason why I'm such a big fan is because it was never going to be easy for the Florida Mutineers to move away from the Skies and from the Awakening era, right? That has been their core to. Skies has been on the franchise literally since Florida Mutineers even have existed. Awakening, who joined middle of the way through the first year of franchising, has been with the team ever since they started. It was never going to be easy to be like, okay, listen, it's over, right? Mutually, maybe Florida was ready to move forward. It sounded like Skies and Awakening, they were ready to move on. It's never going to be easy for a franchise to start over. And you could talk about, right, with all the teams that were being announced, it felt like Florida Mutineers, there was never really a running rumor with what was going to go on with that team. You know, there was talk, there was discussions. And so for them to come out with a roster that I personally am a big fan of, I think it's very intriguing to discuss what they were able to do. And I would say it's a very impressive looking lineup. Again, considering all those things that we just discussed. So the four-man lineup moving into MW2 is going to be Havoc, Vickle, MAJORMANIAK, and Brack. One thing that stands out to me when you first hear those four names is going to be about challengers. I can guarantee you, moving into next season, a lot of the focus on the Florida Mutineers is going to be like, hey, look at what they were able to do. They grabbed 2 challenger players, when in reality, it actually was 4 challenger players. All 4 of these guys at some point played in challengers. Havoc, who would later join the Minnesota Rocker, was part of that unbelievably dominant Texas Nation lineup. MAJORMANIAK, who was benched by the Minnesota Rocker, actually for Havoc, funny enough. He saw a lot of success in his 2 to 3 month stint whenever he was in challengers, later would sign with the Florida Mutineers and is going to move into this next season as the only player that Florida actually did keep. You've got Vickle, right? Rookie season for him. I mean, just a player who came out of nowhere in terms of, you know, he moved to North America, what he was able to do for Toronto North America Academy. He saw loads of success, played on one of the best teams of challengers alongside of Scrappy. Brack, I mean, by definition, is a CDL rookie. He's never started in the CDL, but we've heard of his name before. We know how great he was, especially in Black Ops 4. Saw a ton of success in challengers this past season. Later would go on to win Challenger Champs, and then also had a hand in winning the Toronto Open prior to that. And what I really want to do, so like I said, this team has a big focus in challengers, and that's really what I want to talk about first, more in depth with the statistics, because it's super interesting. Because, and this will be kind of like point 1 on what I believe Florida did right, and that would be they made the right investment when it comes down to challenger talent. They absolutely did, right? As we said, all 4 players spent time here. All 4 players ran challengers when they were in that environment. They have a member of the team that won every single challengers LAN. Minnesota Open, they have the winner of that. Toronto Open, they have who won it. They have the second place finisher team as well. They have the Boston Open champion. They have the challengers champs, right? Number 1 and number 2. And then throughout the regular season, they had a player on their team that won the stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's all of them. Regular season, and who won the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4 playoffs. literally the Florida Mutineers, I mean, if this team came together in Vanguard and Challengers, they would have destroyed everybody. And so it's so interesting because the reason why I keep talking so much about Challengers is obviously because the players were involved with it, but also because it's been such a huge part of really what is the primary focus when we talk about a CDL season. Like, we're always talking about rookies because it's always fun. We love roster development in the CDL and really in Call of Duty Esports in general. The reason why we love it so much is because oftentimes it works. Like, that's something that I feel like goes so under the radar, is that does every rookie work out? Obviously not, right? We saw that happen last year a few times. But is it worth the investment considering how many times it has worked out? Absolutely. It is absolutely worth the investment. It is worth the chance to give a rookie an opportunity, especially if he has had a lot of success, at least in prior years of being in Challengers. And so, like I said, if you have a list of guys who not only have experience, Havoc and MAJORMANIAK, when they were in Challengers, it was proven that they are top of their game. They need to be back in the CDL. Brack, who was able to do what he did, right? At the last 3 months, was running Challengers, won Challengers champs. He deserves to be in the CDL. Vickle, one of the best SMGs in all of Challengers. No question about it. He deserves to be in the CDL. There is a method that the Florida Mutineers have started to figure out, in my eyes, really throughout the entirety of franchising. And it's going with rookie talent. It's going with young players. It's investing in younger rosters. And while it doesn't work out every season, it's been worth the investment. Because like I said, they go for a young player in Skies. They go for a young player at Awakening. They go for young player after young player after young player. That's what they do. And like I said, that's what I feel like Florida did right this time, was considering the rebuild. They did the right rebuild. They went to the right system. They went to Challengers. It wasn't like, hey, let's just grab some veteran players, let's throw them together and see what happens. They did the right things. And I feel like the players that they added from Challengers and also from prior experience being MAJORMANIAK and Havoc, it's the right combination. And that's what I really want to talk about. Another thing that I feel like Florida did right was that they decided to stick with MAJORMANIAK. I really like that decision. I feel like Major is only, as seasons progress, developing more and more as a leader, developing more as an IGL. I don't know, it feels like the tone of like roles lately, I guess really the last few seasons, has basically turned into your main AR more often than not is a veteran. Your main AR more often than not is a vocal player, an IGL perhaps. And while it's not like that with every team, MAJORMANIAK fits that bill, right? He absolutely fits that bill. And so I really like that for the Florida Mutineers, because you have that locked in, right? One of your first positions, you've got the main AR. It doesn't have to be unbelievably dominant. Doesn't have to be the best Slayer in the world, which we know that MAJORMANIAK is not going to put up, 1.3 KDs like a Celium, for example. But he does do what he needs to, and he's a great option for rosters, for younger players to rely on. And as we said, you have 2 rookies on this team. By definition, again, if we want to call Brack a rookie, which for the sake of conversation, I'll just kind of label him as that for right now. Another reason why I'm glad that Florida stuck with MAJORMANIAK is because I feel like the Mutineers instantly recognized, because they did add him right before Major Force, didn't have a long run with him, but they instantly saw how a lot of the issues that they were suffering were starting to be figured out. And I don't even think that MAJORMANIAK was the perfect fit for that team, but whenever he came into the roster, they finally had an IGL. They finally had a great in-game voice, and they had somebody who could help out their search and destroy. The Florida Mutineers, their biggest issue last season was not just inconsistency, as it has been for the past 2 years, but it was their search and destroy. They were the 3rd worst team in Majors 1 through Major 3. When MAJORMANIAK gets added to this team in Stage 4, they were a top 3 search and destroy team in the game, right? When Minnesota had him on the roster, right, in Stage 1 and Stage 2, best S&D team in the game. Now, the problem that they had was that they couldn't win hard points. It was the reverse effect. But whenever MAJORMANIAK leaves that team, they end up going, the Minnesota Rocker, go to middle of the pack, right? They end up going, they actually improve their hard point because of what Havoc was able to do. So you kind of have this returning effect where Florida couldn't win S&Ds. MAJORMANIAK comes in, changes that. Minnesota couldn't win hard points. They had Havoc, and they were able to see success. So I like that they stuck with MAJORMANIAK, not just because of his intangibles, but it's because of what was so interesting last season, which was this dynamic between Florida and Minnesota, two players who came in and instantly changed their rosters for the better in different capacities. And I want to talk about Havoc a little bit more, but I really like the fact that you're going to have that prior experience. MAJORMANIAK and Havoc have played with each other before. I think it was like Gen G and Black Ops 4 was at least the most recent one. That team didn't have a great finish at Champs. I remember that season, but ultimately were a great looking roster. I know they at least made one final in Black Ops 4. He also has experience with Brack and Challengers. They were able to win the Toronto Open together. So you already kind of have, I imagine like FIFA, like you have those green connections between a few of your players when it comes down to this squad. Also, one thing that I really do like about the Florida Mutineers, as we'll get ready to come to a close, is that they honestly may have one of the better SMG duos in the league moving into next year. And again, all of that is contingent upon questions. It's upon, is Havoc going to be able to do what he did in Vanguard? It's going to be contingent on how good that Vickle is going to be for the team. There is a lot. But I feel like the ceiling of these two players together is very, very high. I still feel like Havoc, whenever he joined the Minnesota Rocker, did not get enough credit for what he was able to do for that team. I was shocked. I really was, that we've gone to this point, and I know that not every team has announced their roster. We still have 4 teams that have yet to announce. But I was surprised, for whatever reason, that Havoc was not instantly given an opportunity by Minnesota. Granted, I think Minnesota did a great job with their roster, but that another team didn't bring him in based off what he was able to do. We saw so many impressive moments, so many big series where he took over. The way that Minnesota transformed from a S&D team, which is what MAJORMANIAK's influence was on the roster, to Havoc, who is then now leading the team to winning hard points, to winning respawns, to just taking over at times in Search and Destroy, playing a fast-paced role, was excellent. He had the 6th highest SMG KD from last season. He had the 5th highest SMG damage per life last season. He was top 5 in SMG KD for hardpoint, and hardpoint SMG damage per life. He was top 5 as well among SMGs. I mean, like I said, when it comes down to what he was able to do for Rocker, I mean, there are a few guys that I can think of, but there weren't many more that were more impactful than somebody like Havoc and how he was for the Rocker. So I was very surprised that he did not get an instant opportunity from another team whenever he was announced. And maybe Florida had him picked up off the rip. I'm not sure, how all this stuff develops, but at least based off the timeline that we have when it comes down to roster changes, I was surprised that Havoc got announced a little bit later, more in the middle, rather than earlier on. Now, the other half of this SMG duo is going to be Vickle. I think, and again, it's difficult because technically CDL rookies, you only got 3 of them right now, and technically Florida has 2 of those. I'll say depending on how many rookies, because we're going to have a bunch of them at some point throughout the season. We're going to have a good class, I think, this year, and a lot of it's contingent on roster changes, players being added in the middle of the season. But I truly feel like Vickle is going to have a Rookie of the Year case. I really do. I think he is going to have an opportunity to really showcase his talent. He's a very talented, young, vocal SMG. You don't hear that all that often. He's got excellent pop-off potential. I didn't watch every single Challengers match, I'll be honest with you. But I really liked what I was able to see. Alongside Havoc, I think is actually going to be a great fit for him. A veteran, somebody that you can learn from. I feel like, honestly, 2 guys who, if you ask them to play a certain role, would play it the exact same way. Great reaction, great awareness for the game, and the positive if you're Florida is that the guy's only 19, right? You're not bringing in a 21, 22, 23-year-old rookie. No, you're bringing in somebody who's fresh, somebody who's going to have those quick reactions, somebody who is unbelievably dedicated, and somebody that you can have on your roster if he is going to be that great, which I believe he has a lot of talent. Someone who you can rely on for a very, very long time. And so I feel like, again, I like the moves that were made. I feel like you are going to have a possibly very, very good SMG line when it comes down to these two. Both players who I think are willing to be unselfish. 2 guys who have pop-off potential, who I think can at times and will in MW2 take over on maps. Havoc is one of my favorite SMG he plays one of my favorite SMG roles, which is somebody who is vocal, somebody who is willing to take over on maps, but isn't always relied upon to do that. Like, he's not somebody who has to go off, but will do that if need be. And I feel like Vickle is somebody who can be that. I feel like a lot of this roster is going to rely on Vickle. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk a ton about Brack, but I think the same thing is going to be said for him. A very valuable flex role. How is he going to play in that position? I think a lot of it is going to come down to your rookies, right? It's going to come down to how well that they play. But I think when we talk about how important the SMG line is, I think the Florida did a great job in that category as well. And like I said, with every roster, you're going to have questions, right? Is Havoc going to be that same player that he was last season? Is Brack going to be good enough in the flex role? Is MAJORMANIAK going to be good enough to be a main AR in the CDL? Is Vickle going to be a top SMG or just another okay player? The questions are there with every single team. The risks are always there with every lineup that you put together, especially one like this. But I feel like the risks that Florida decided to make, I'm happy with. I am happy with the risks that the Mutineers elected to take in this case. Like I said, a lot in my eyes is going to fall on the rookies. It's going to follow their development. But I feel like you do have two solid leaders who are going to have great chemistry with the lineup. I feel like from an in-game perspective, the roster is going to be good. I feel like S&D wise, MAJORMANIAK's going to have this team in shape. I feel like from an SMG line perspective, this roster is going to be great in that category as well. And then a lot of it's really just going to depend on the slang levels. And like I said, if Havoc is that same player, you've got one great one. If Vickle's going to be that guy that we expect him to be, you're going to have that as well. If Brack can be a top of the line player, well, there you go. You got three solid options who I don't believe are necessarily going to be top 3, top 5 players in the game, but guys who can hover around that region. If you're looking for consistency, again, one of the biggest points of emphasis, I feel like Florida was able to do it. I like what the Mutineers did. Like I said, I'm not saying that they are a top 3 team in the game moving into MW2, but I feel like they are going to be one of the more under the radar rosters. I would say for me, one of my favorites, if we're talking early on, a roster that I'm going to constantly consider as one of my underdogs when we talk about CDL events. And I feel like considering the rebuild that you have to make after losing Skies and Awakening, I can't imagine it was easy, but I love the direction that they decided to go, investing in challengers and investing in these 4 players specifically. Hats off to the Florida Mutineers for making the roster moves that they did. Ladies and gentlemen, do you agree with what I feel like is going to be a solid under the radar type of roster for the Florida Mutineers? Or do you think they made a mistake? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below about this team. I will let you know if you made it to this point in the video. We are going to be having some very interesting interviews with some players happening soon as well. So if you have any questions, I will be interviewing a certain player from the Florida Mutineers. I'm not going to say who that is as of this moment, but if you have any questions for the Florida Mutineers, make sure to let me know on social media or in the comments questions that you'd have for one of the players that's going to be interviewed. And pretty much a few days time from now, I think is when we're going to be doing it. So like I said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this video. Thank you for watching another edition of LandO's Logic. I will see you back here on the channel very soon.